Hey everyone, here I am down in the corner. Today we're going to talk about Ontario's housing and is it in fact a scarce thing? There's a lot of talk right now about interest rates and housing prices, and we have covered a lot of that in the past and where we think interest rates are going to go and the whole story with debt and that kind of stuff. You can kind of look through the YouTube channel to find some of that information, but today we're just going to focus on Ontario's housing need. And if you're a real estate investor, I think this is really important information to be aware of or at least expose yourself to. So there's this report from smartprosperity.ca that came out in August 2022 that's really interesting. We've had Mike Moffat on the podcast before, so if you're aware of the Your Life, Your Terms podcast, you can hear a full hour of him talking about some of this stuff. But here's some really fascinating information. This is on page 19 of the report. You can see what they've done for Ontario is they've taken the existing housing shortage from every region of the province and taken the projected number of family formations, added that together, and then come up with total housing needs for the next decade here in this area. And they've done it by Peel, Toronto, York, Ottawa, Halton, so all the different regions across the province. And when you go through all of that, it's rather interesting because at the bottom you find that we have a need of 1.5 million houses. So the total housing need over the next decade is a total of 1.5 million, which is an absolutely huge number. And if I scroll down here to this next page over here, you can see the greater Golden Horseshoe area within Ontario. They've also broken that down on page 21 of the report. And if you take those areas of Ontario, the need is 1.2 million versus the current projections of need that is needed by in Ontario of 700,000. So I just want to cover this point here because according to this report, we need in the Greater Golden Horseshoe 1.2 million homes. But the current numbers that the Ontario government is working with is 700,000. And that comes from this Hemson consulting report that was put together in August of 2021. But when you break down some of the census data that's covered in this report here and some of the numbers they're using, that number that the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing is using for housing needs in this province seems way off. And it seems off by an absolutely huge number of 500,000 homes. And I think when you see that as just like an absolute number like that, it can be a little bit difficult to just quite understand what that means. So I've just kind of taken the population of Mississauga is about 800,000 now. So if we think of the population of Mississauga of 800,000, and if we need 500,000 new homes, and let's say the average amount of people in each home in the province, I think it's like 2.1 right now is the average. So if there's 2 people in each of these 500,000 homes that we need, that means that's a population base of 1 million people. So we need basically another Mississauga. So if I bring up a map here, here's the Greater Golden Horseshoe area around Lake Ontario here. And if Mississauga has a population of about 800,000 right now, we need basically another Mississauga worth of homes in this area. And if you look at the Golden Horseshoe here, and here's the green belt around the Golden Horseshoe, where are we going to fit another Mississauga worth of homes in this area? So if Mississauga takes like a chunk like this, if you can see my mouse going around here, if it takes a chunk of land like this, where exactly are we going to fit that? And the population growth in this area, if I show you one of Ben Rabidou's charts that he just posted this on September 30th, take a look at the population growth in Canada. So the population growth in Canada from the year 2000 to 2014 or so kind of hovered in between 300 and 400,000. I mean, before this, it was about 250,000 a year would be a really high year. Then that really went up through the 2000s, and then after 2010, it seemed to increase more. And then it just went astronomical. Here's the COVID dip, but we're right back up. So if Ontario is getting about 44% of this population growth, it just seems like we're going to continue to grow really at a strong pace here. And you can see Toronto. Here's a Ryerson. Here's a Ryerson report. This is the Ryerson University Center for Urban Research and Land Development report from 2019 that showed Toronto was the fastest growing city in North America. And even if I find the latest report from Ryerson, even with the COVID lockdowns, which kind of prevented people from moving around, Toronto in 2020 was still the second fastest growing city in all of North America. And it's interesting, Canada has a bunch of really fast growing cities kind of on this list. But Toronto is growing really, really quickly. And if you compare that to other big cities, like there's New York and Chicago, these metropolitan centers are actually losing people. So in North America, out of one of the big cities, Toronto's really unique in that not only are we continuing to grow, we're continuing to grow at one of the fastest paces in all of North America. So what are we going to do for housing in this area? If I flip back to this kind of report here, the Smart Prosperity Report, it's called Ontario's Need for 1.5 million more homes. And if you look into the Greater Golden Horseshoe area here, this is the projection of housing units that we're going to complete, 700,000. But we have a need of 1.2 million, which is a shortfall of 500,000 new homes, which represents a population base of 1 million people, or roughly one Mississauga that needs to fit in here, that we're going to be short. So where is this going to come from? And if you're a real estate investor, this is some of the numbers that I think really I find rather interesting, because I think in the near term and maybe even medium term, who knows what's going to happen with real estate prices, especially with central banks kind of playing games the way they are, with high interest rates. They're kind of trying to fake everybody out, in my opinion, by saying they're going to raise interest rates more and keep them higher for longer, even though when you look at the debt numbers, you really kind of realize that the math doesn't work. So they can do it for short periods of time. But in the medium to longer term, where do I think house prices are going to go with this type of scarcity? I really think the demand for housing is going to continue to increase in this area, which is going to continue to drive prices. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's what it seems like to me, just based on the fundamentals. So if we look at the three fundamental factors of real estate, kind of the cost of money or interest rates, supply and demand, if we remove kind of the interest rate factor just for a temporary moment here and look at supply and demand, it looks like we're just going to have such an increase in demand over the next 10 years here that it's really going to drive the need for housing. And if interest rates come back in line kind of in the medium term, it really is going to be interesting to see what happens to housing prices here. So this is the kind of fundamental information that we like looking at to help us make some longer term projections. So when sometimes in the media people are freaking out about housing prices, we just kind of sit back and look at this kind of information and think, in the medium and longer term, if with patience, housing looks like a real scarce thing in this area. So that's it for this week. Hopefully you find that useful. Till next time, your life, your terms. Thank you.